Okay, well, today I'm going to try something a little bit different. I'm sitting here on my favorite mountain sides, just on the outskirts of Fukuoka City. In fact, we're quite close to the airport, so if you hear planes going over, you'll know why. It's because you're near an airport. Nevertheless, this is a little piece of remnant native forest here, existing in a natural stream, a valley that is, after a certain elevation, about 200 meters up the mountain, is no longer dammed or in any way changed or altered from its natural course. Well, today's video is not really a video at all. It's more like a podcast, although I guess you wouldn't call it quite a podcast. I just thought I'd go ahead and tell you a little bit about my journey here in Japan, and also share some of the things that as I go along the way that I'm seeing. I am sitting in a boulder field, which you can gather from some of the video that I've going to be uploading here. This is not glacial deposits. This is through erosion. Right? So these mountains are very loose, right? It's just sort of this. I don't know the exact geology other than to tell you that it is volcanic in origin. But basically, the rocks. There's no heavy-duty bedrock right here, right? It's all, at least near the surface, quite loose, and so these big giant boulders everywhere. And as these mountains erode down, they leave in many places, particularly in these valleys that are highly eroded due to the intense rainfalls we get here. I got a guy walking by right now. He's wondering what the hell I'm doing. Anyway, it leaves these big boulder fields, and the forests, of course, have come in and taken over them. I have tried to get off the trail a little bit here so that at least people as they walk by won't be completely freaked out by my presence. Anyway, so here I am in this boulder field in this old, I won't call it old growth, but it's pretty old growth. There's some large trees in here. There's a couple of large celtis trees, so hackberries, Celtis chinensis, I believe. But there's all kinds of trees in here. There's this is the laurelin type forest, so this is where the laurel family dominates, or at least really what it is broadleafed evergreens. There's quite a few different families in here. There's a lot of oaks too, an oak family, so that's Fagaceae. Anyway, enough of science and stuff like that. Let's talk about some personal things. So what drove me to come to Japan? I think what drove me to come to Japan all those years ago, now that's almost 18 years that I've been here, is I've always had a kind of a wanderlust, but I never had a whole lot of courage about it. And so I ended up not leaving America for, well, the first 40 years of my life. I was born and grew up in New York State, and that's where I came to love all things natural, and in particular plants. I grew up in an environment where I was surrounded by native forests and of that region, and all the wildlife that was there, primarily birds and raccoons and small animals, stuff like that. There weren't any coyotes at that time, although now I hear there's a lot of coyotes all over the eastern United States. But there are lots and lots of birds, and of course there was all this secondary forest that in the area I had lived is where the Dutch had settled. And they had cut down pretty much all the trees, except for they left, again, some remnants here and there, and there was a lot of secondary forest coming up. So that's where I learned to love plants. And then after high school, I decided to move to Florida because I was really enamored of this idea of the tropics, and there were the Everglades down there, and I was just fascinated by that. And I spent my first year down at the University of Miami. I was rather, oh, there's a nice bird. Hey, buddy. I was rather disillusioned by the, well, at that time Miami really was kind of a mess. That was back in the Coke years, and there was a lot of murder, and, you know, America was going through a tough time back then. That was 1981. And I really just wanted out of there. It was a place where you needed a lot of money to, and I didn't have a lot of money. It wasn't my vibe. So I spent a year down there. I did travel into the Glades and saw all that, and saw a lot of native orchids and loved it, and made repeated trips back there. But I moved back northward to Gainesville, Florida, the following year, so that would be my sophomore year. And that's really where I got to reunite with the natural world in a more direct way, because Gainesville is up in the, you know, it's in North Florida. It's up in a limestone region. There's a lot of caves and wild rivers there and things like that. And, you know, not the tropics by any means, or even subtropical there, but really quite beautiful. Anyway, so that's the beginning of how I decided to, well, I didn't decide, that's how I became interested in the natural world and plants. Primarily through my father, although my mother fostered my interest as well. She did not in any way dissuade me from doing that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop here. Okay, so I picked a little better location here where I can speak more freely. I was a little too close to the path there before, and people were going by and kind of, I won't say they're freaking out, but, you know, some guy talking to himself in the woods, you know. Is that guy okay? Anyway, yeah, it's a good question. Is that guy okay? So I've, in the same general area, just a little further up the mountain, and I'm still in this very highly weathered rock area. Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, Florida. Well, I spent 20 years in Florida. I was at the University of Florida for too long a time. I liked being a student. I was one of those people. You know, didn't want to get on with life. And so I did become like a professional student. I did teach high school science for a few years before returning actually to the University of Florida to work on my PhD, which I didn't quite finish. I did everything up to the dissertation, so I have what we call a post-hole digger PhD. Except for the dissertation. And then I was just kind of doing nothing. So I was like, you know, what the heck am I doing with my life, you know? So at the ripe old age of 40, I decided to go ahead and make tracks for a whole new place. I knew that I was going to just stay in America doing what I was doing, and that was okay. But I also knew that if I didn't move, then I would never get a chance to go see any other part of the world in any real way. I had not started a family, I was not married, and so I just, you know, one day woke up in June, 18 years ago, right about now. Yep, just about this time, and I just said enough is enough. And over the summer, I got rid of and sold everything that I had, which included a small business. And I came here. almost on a lark. I had never taught English in my life. I was a certified science teacher, but that is all. So I had educational background. My parents were both teachers, but really I had no rhyme or reason to come here other than that I wanted to, pursue another life in another culture. I mean, that was my whole point, was just to go to another culture so that I could see what it would be like to live somewhere else. And I did that. And all I can tell you is that the first year was beyond the pale. It was insane. I think I moved like 9 times in that first year. I literally was sleeping on the ground on tatami mats, which are relatively soft compared to, say, a hardwood floor, but still are not exactly what you would call, terribly comfortable. I was sleeping directly on those next to 2 suitcases that I owned, with a little tiny pillow about the, like the size of a throw pillow. And eventually I settled in. I found a place with the help of some friends that helped me go through the whole process of getting a home, which was, really quite remarkable. I was lucky. And I happen to be in that very same home to this very day. In fact, the garden videos that you see me doing, it's of that house and that yard on the edge of the city. Anyway, when I came here, I knew nothing about this culture. I knew nothing about the language, although now it's even arguable that I still don't know anything about the language, although that's not really true. You begin to realize how deep language is once you get to a place, start to actually try to converse in it. But I had to learn the culture, and of course I had to learn all these plants that I was seeing around me. And when I was a kid, we had kept bonsai and stuff like that around the house. I had, a mild inkling of Japanese culture, and but it's one thing to have a mild inkling. It's another thing to actually be immersed in a whole new culture, 24/7. And that's exactly where I found myself. And so in those days, so this is the early 2000s, translation software was poor. So trying to figure out through internet sources, what the heck anything was, I'm thinking in terms of plants here specifically, was really difficult. So what I relied on in those days was guidebooks. And luckily there's of course the writing system here is insane, kanji. It takes quite a bit of time to master kanji, and I've just reached a point where I've realized that I'm never going to master it, primarily because I have no desire to put that much effort in, which is, I don't know, old mind combined with laziness, bad combination. Anyway, they have a system here of writing that's called kana. So it's hiragana and katakana. And anyway, it's a simplified system. It's really kind of based on, 54 sounds, I believe. And so those symbols are easy to learn. You can learn them in a weekend, and you can learn the sounds in that much time too. And a little bit of usage, you could know them pretty quick. For the most part, they're not very useful. But the one thing, in terms of really using the language, but the one system, katakana, is used exclusively for, or almost exclusively for, foreign terms that have been incorporated into the Japanese language. So these are borrowed terms, just like we have in our own language, English. And it just so happens that all the plants are named by their kana names. Now, many of them also have a Japanese name, which would be it's going to be kanji usually. Could be hiragana, I guess. But for the most part, plants have this kana name. And that's great, because then that makes you able to actually read the names of things, whether that be a web source or whether it be in a field guide. You may not be able to read the description and all of that, but you do know the plants you've got. And the minute that you can do that, now you've got that name. You can input that name into a search field in any browser, boom, and you come up with a bunch of hits. And now, in the old days, I used to go through this torturous thing of trying to translate word for word what the heck they were talking about. And now with translation software being so great, boom, you can really, plow through it. And I get to the point now where I can actually look at the kanji, and I won't say that I can read it, but I can make heads or tails of what they're talking about in a very general way. So that was kind of my first introduction to Japan. It was just trying to deal with the completely novel environment with no language skills. I went from being a guy with all this information, and I was an information type guy, and suddenly I have no information. So that was my first experience here. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up in this section here, and I'm going to go for a walk up the trail, and I'll catch you again. Okay, so here we are up in this incredible forest. We're starting to get up in an elevation here of, I really don't know. I'm going to guess around 400 meters, 500 meters, somewhere in that range. And you start getting to this really mossy area where all these boulder fields are suddenly covered in moss. Things open up, and it's just this very magical, ethereal looking landscape. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Botany Boy. So some people have asked me, why Botany Boy? Why do you call it that? I had one guy say, more like Botany Man. And I'm like, yeah, well, pretty soon it's going to be Botany Old Man. Anyway, what's that all about? Well, in 1996, back when it was unfortunately already popular to walk the Appalachian Trail, I decided to go ahead and walk that with a friend. And anyway, during that journey, when I say unfortunately, I mean, prior to that in the 80s and before, it really was an epic journey that people took that was really quite amazing. And by the time I got to it in 96, it was already somewhat becoming cliche. That all was precipitated out by an article in National Geographic in 1987 featuring the trail. Anyway, side story. Anyway, about a week in, I couldn't shut my mouth about all the wonderful plants I was seeing, all kinds of trilliums and whatnot, and especially trilliums. And there's just literally fields of the things. I couldn't shut up about it. And these two young women, also walking the trail at the time, said, oh, well, we're going to have to give you a name. We're going to call you the botanist. And I said, oh, that sounds interesting. And then there was another guy who was an airplane pilot, actually, on hiatus. And he said, nah, call him Botany Boy. And so it stuck. So that was my name for the trail. And then later on, when I decided to start writing a website, because that's how I was viewing it in those days, as a website, I just didn't know what to call it. So I think my original idea was to call it Japanese Orchids and Ferns, and I even own a URL with that name. But that seemed a little bit silly, so I thought I'd just give it kind of like more of a personal handle, and so that's why I came up with Botany Boy. Just so happens that Botany Boys is also a rap band out of Texas, so or hip hop. I think they're rap. Anyway, it's really funny. So if you look up on the on the internet, if you put in Botany Boy, you're going to get Botany Boys first, and then eventually you'll see me in there somewhere. So that's where Botany Boy comes from. Like I said, right around 2010, I started writing about the plants I was seeing in Japan. And a friend of mine said, hey, why don't you go ahead and put up a website and see if you can't, he's all into trying to commercialize everything. And I was like, okay. And he says, well, just throw some ads on there and see if it works. Of course, it's funny. In those days, I made more money than I make now, which is really funny because I had lower readership and everything. It was just that the way that the algorithm was set up in those days, I could do better. Nowadays, the whole internet is just so saturated with things, and people realize that they can make easy money, and and the algorithm has definitely changed so that it favors more commercially viable stuff, as you can tell by the things that I write about, Japanese orchids and ferns. I'm pretty esoteric. I try to expand beyond that into more normal realms, but it's tough for me because I have a very specific taste with regard to plants, and it tends to be on the unique side. Doesn't mean I don't like regular plants. I do. I've tried to cater that to some degree, both on the website, Botany Boy, and also through my YouTube channel. Recently, I've been doing more stuff like this, personal stuff around my house, in large measure because I'm kind of locked down to my house because of this whole COVID-19 thing. But anyway, I guess the point is to try to focus on what is here and accentuate that, but in a way that it's still accessible to people. I have to really watch myself because my tendencies are to be a little bit unique, too unique. And by the way, right now it is starting to rain, so there you go. That was not supposed to happen today. Probably a passing shower. I don't know. I'm going to go a little further up the mountain here, and maybe I'll have one more thing to talk about there. I just wanted to give you an overview of my situation here in Japan and how I got here and what this whole thing is about, give it some context. So let's go ahead and run up the trail here, and hopefully I won't get run out by the rain. Okay, well, I made it up to the place I wanted to go. This is a cliff face here. We're close to the top of the ridge line, probably within a matter of another couple 100, 300, 200 meters, I'd say. So I don't know, we're probably up around 750 meters here, I would say. That'd be my guess. This is a unique place because in the wintertime, at this elevation, this whole rock face freezes, and there's a big famous frozen waterfall here. But equally interesting is the flora that lives here. So there is hosta growing on the rock, Hosta siboldiana. It's growing pretty much as a lithophyte, just in the cracks and on the very edge of the rock itself. In the dripping wet, they like that. So that might be unique to all of you who grow hostas. You can actually see how they grow here. This also is where the native hydrangea serrata, lives. This is the small-leafed hydrangea that has these serrate leaves and bright blue flowers. They're just coming into bloom now, so it's a little bit early for them. Anyway, the forest here is transitioning away from the predominantly evergreen broadleaf forest, the laurel forest further down. The trees are still here. You got a lot of camellias, and you've got Neolithia, which is another group of these broadleafed laurelin trees, and some of the oaks and so on. But you're also beginning to see more of the cornus here. There also are beech trees here. And I'm looking actually right now at a lovely Cornus cosa, the so-called Korean dogwood in common parlance, flowering right here on the rock, next to the rock. Yeah, really unique place, beautiful place to come up here in winter or in summertime. Interesting also, in the last few years, this has not been freezing and not forming that lovely waterfall because we just have not been getting any consistent cold here in these Fukuoka winters. I don't know when the last year it really froze well, maybe around 2015, so 5 years ago. And that's whatever you want to call that. You want to call it climate change, you call it climate change. Anyway, this is where I'm going to go ahead and end the quote-unquote podcast. I don't know if you enjoyed this. I feel like I'm trying to get some content up each week, and this seemed like a way for me to do it where I wasn't going to kill myself in production, and hopefully would still be engaging enough, at least for my subscribers to enjoy. So anyway, let me know. Give me a thumbs up if you like it, and if you don't like it, well, you can give me a thumbs down if you want to.